Hi, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on how to be a successful grad school applicant. I'm David Robinson, the Director of Membership and Meetings at the Linguistic Society of America. We're going to take just a few more minutes to allow more people to sign in, and then we'll get started in about 4 or 5 after. Okay? So hang on, and we will be with you again very shortly. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on how to be a successful grad school applicant. I'm David Robinson, the Director of Membership and Meetings for the Linguistic Society of America. Right now on your screen, you're seeing a short slideshow about the LSA and what we do. And if you're not already a member, you'll see a special discount offer for attendees of this webinar. I want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your day to join us. I'm happy to introduce Dr. Mary Bucholtz, Professor of Linguistics at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and moderator of this panel. She has organized today's webinar and will be introducing the panelists to us. There's going to be substantial time for question and answer, so please have your questions ready. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to make sure you're familiar with the GoToWebinar dashboard. First of all, you'll see an audio widget on your dashboard, and that will allow you to hear the audio portion of this webinar using your computer or on the phone. Your microphones are disabled during this webinar, so during the question and answer portion, you can use the questions widget that you'll see down there for asking questions. And if your question is for a particular one of the panelists, please say that. And let's see. Finally, we'd like to take a quick survey so that our panelists can get a better idea of who the audience is. I'm going to open that in a minute. It just asks a bit about your status, and then we'll display the results to everybody. So the poll is opening right now. Go ahead and answer, and once everyone's voted, we'll display the results. Okay, and it looks like almost all of you have voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and display the results. So there you have it. It looks like virtually everyone on here is either an undergraduate student or a master's student, and that's not surprising. So hopefully that'll give the panelists a better idea of who the audience is. I'm going to stop sharing my screen in a moment, and I will be happy to turn the floor over to Mary Bucholtz.
All right, I'm just getting my camera, I hope, to work. And I'm afraid I'm not seeing myself. Is anyone else seeing me?
I'm also not seeing you.
Okay. Not sure what happened there. I've also lost the slides, David. Don't know where else I may have to relaunch. I don't want to do that. It seems a bit extreme, but, and it's not crucial, in fact, that you see me,
Right.
if everyone can hear me.
If you want to go ahead on audio, I think that would be fine.
Okay, my only concern is I can't actually see anything on the screen anymore. So I can try relaunching, but that would probably cut me out. I don't know that we want to lose the time.
Let's just go ahead and I'll see if I can fix it from here while you go.
Okay, thanks. And I want to thank everyone for being here. We are delighted that you all took the time to do this today. And I am also very grateful to the panelists for taking the time to be here as well and for sharing their expertise. David very generously credited me with organizing this webinar. However, I'm actually really just a figurehead standing in for the person who I think was really instrumental in making this happen. My colleague, Dr. Ann Charity Hudley, here at the University of California, Santa Barbara. She wasn't able to be with us today, so I'm standing in for her and doing my best to represent her and do her justice. And I also really want to thank David Robinson, who was really crucial in organizing this event and taking care of the logistics, which, as you can see, are complex. So just to let you know what we'll be doing I'll say this morning because I'm in California, but today we'll be doing brief introductions of our panelists who will just briefly say something about who they are, where they're coming from, and that sort of thing, and as well as their expertise in graduate admissions. Then we have some kind of starter questions, frequently asked questions that we've received over the years and that we thought might be a good starting point for the discussion. So I'll moderate those and ask the panelists to comment on them. And then we've tried to save lots of time for audience questions, and David will be guiding you through that process. You'll be using the question portion of your control panel to submit those questions, and he'll be moderating that. So I'll go ahead and get started. I think I'm also supposed to introduce myself briefly, so I'll say I'm Mary Bucholtz. I'm a sociocultural linguist at the University of California, Santa Barbara. I'm also department chair, and I have been the director of graduate studies for a number of years, and I'm currently also the interim graduate director. And so I guess I might be weighing in those capacities as well as in my role as moderator. So I think at this point I'm supposed to stop sharing my webcam, but I don't think it ever took. So I will try to do that. And then I believe Jamaal will be the first person that I'll be introducing. I want to wait for him to appear on your screen. Oh, great. Okay, so Jamaal Muwwakkil is a graduate student here at UC Santa Barbara, and I will let him take it from here.
Great, thank you, Mary. And good morning or afternoon to everyone. My name is Jamaal Muwwakkil. I'm a third-year graduate student here in the linguistics department at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Although it seems like I've been here forever, and also that I just got here, I want to be able to share my experience with the graduate school process and applying and deciding where would be a good fit for me, how it went for me, and some recommendations that I think you might appreciate or hope you might benefit from my experience. So just to give you a bit of information about myself, I'm originally from Southern California, from a nice, beautiful city named Compton, California. I was a transfer student from Los Angeles City College, to the University of California, Los Angeles. There was a 10-year gap between when I finished high school and I transferred to UCLA, and then I came straight through UCLA to UCSB. That trajectory was fraught with some challenges, but I feel like I benefited from that structure as well. That's relevant as it relates to my first generation status, because I was wholly unaware of graduate school and what it meant. I found myself in graduate school because I want to be a professor. And so I am currently living my dream, right? So this path, but at this time I wasn't aware of the path. I wasn't aware that grad school was a thing, that graduate school, rather, I wasn't aware what graduate school was logistically, like what is the day-to-day brass tacks of graduate school, much less how a person might gain entry. So I had to learn all of that on the fly, and then as a transfer student, relatively quickly. Um, so what I did in order to try to operationalize that was lean on my resources, and it's my first recommendation to you. Lean on your resources if you are interested at all in graduate school, and if you know you wanted to pursue graduate school in a specific field like linguistics. Talk to people. That shouldn't be a secret to the linguists in your department. Ask them how your interests align with which schools and which scholars at different places, and let them to make recommendations for you. It's really hard. The world is big and small at the same time, so it's really hard to know where might be a good fit, and you're going to need to lean on those recommendations. The other side of that is if you can gain access to different humans from different departments and different theoretical positionalities, that would be great. A great place to do that, if at all possible, is the LSA Summer Institute that happens every other summer. This year it will be it will be in San Jose. No, it won't. It will be at Davis, UC Davis in California. So if you're able to swing that, that's a great way to kind of gain access into the field, see who's doing what and where, and hopefully inform your choice of grad school as it relates to fit. I found myself again from a positionality as a first generation college student, very wholly unaware of the process. And so process included things like a personal statement, a statement of purpose, several letters of recommendation, taking the GRE. All of these things, again, very labor intensive. So which leads me to my second recommendation. If you can find yourself as a member of a community of people applying to graduate school, that shared accountability is hard to overstate how beneficial that is. You can help each other as far as figuring out what are the different requirements for different schools, hold each other accountable for deadlines and due dates, make sure that read each other's work to make sure that the work that you've written down is representative of who you are, and your best efforts. So having a community of scholars, even if you're not applying the same discipline or to the same schools, but just that shared accountability where it's always in your mind and you always get a second pair of eyes on things really helps to press through those hard times where you're frustrated and you don't want to do this anymore. So yes. As it relates to GRE, take a prep class. The GRE is a ridiculous test and I hate it, but for a lot of places you have to take it. So try to take it as soon to the end of your prep course as possible. Try to give yourself the best chance to score as high as possible. As it relates to fit, which I think is the single largest variable that people are considering, and the faculty on the other side will speak to the truth of that or not. The idea is that the program is going to want to be happy with you, but you're also going to want to be happy with the program, right? So if you have a goal, an idea, an interest that you would like to explore in graduate school, you want to make sure that you're attending a school that embraces that and resources that. If that's not the case, then everyone's going to be unhappy. So how do you get that information? A lot of times that's just through conversation. You have access to the professors, you have access to the graduate students, you have access to the departmental counselor, who's an invaluable administrator, who can give you a lot of this information, and potentially can also facilitate visits. Sometimes they're formalized through sneak peek programs like UCSB has. Other times they're campus visits wherein a faculty or an administrator might create some programming for you to explore the campus, speak to the professors, organize some coffee breaks with you and some of the grad students to have to have answered some of the questions that you may have about the school in particular and the process. So do take advantage of that. Again, fortune favors the prepared. So if you know that you have some schools on your radar, reach out to them, let them express your interest, and let them let you know what resources are available to kind of empower you in that process. Of course, I could say a lot more, and I'm looking forward to your questions about my own experiences, about the process, and about how decisions are made in this regard. But the last point I'd like to hit on is the idea of flexibility. Of course, everyone has their leanings, their interests, what they like thus far, but graduate school is a large part of it is about learning the things that you don't know. So you may have an interest that you come to develop throughout the course of graduate school. So you don't want, even though I've just encouraged you to focus on fit and to figure out where you would be able to develop your own interests, you don't want that to be a stumbling block for you such that you can't learn other things. So linguistics is a magical field where you can do most anything, and it's a good thing about it, right? So lean into that flexibility, lean into that adaptability, whereby you can enter into a space having some directionality, but also being teachable. And I think that'll result in a lot of success and just happiness overall in this relatively fraught journey. So thank you for your attention and your time. I look forward to your questions. And back to you, Mary.
All right, thank you, Jamaal. I think that was fantastic and just what we were hoping for as a way of kind of setting the tone for the discussion to come. So we did ask Jamaal to give us a fuller kind of introduction to help stimulate discussion and questions. Jamaal, we want you back on that screen though. I think we just lost you, but we would like to invite our next panelist. So Dr. Marlyse Baptista, I'm sorry, I said I would try not to mispronounce people's names, but I kind of stumbled there. So Dr. Marlyse Baptista from the University of Michigan is now joining us, and the faculty panelists will now be doing briefer introductions, and then you'll be hearing more from them during the moderated FAQ session.
Hello, thank you for having me on board today. So my name is Marlyse Baptista, and I am here in my capacity of former chair of admissions here in the linguistics department at the University of Michigan. And I am basically here, I'm going to be much briefer than Jamaal, and I have no reasons to be longer actually. What I want to share with you today is first my experience as Grad chair of admissions, and as well as some tips about how to draft together a successful application for grad school.
Great. Thank you, Marlyse. And Dr. Ashwini Deo from the Ohio State University will now be joining the panel.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, David, for organizing this webinar. Hi, everybody. As Mary said, my name is Ashwini Deo, and I'm an associate professor in the linguistics department at Ohio State University. And I've been a member of the graduate admissions committee there, as well as the institution that I taught at before, Yale University, for several years. And I'll be here speaking about my experiences encountering students from a range of backgrounds with a range of interests and experiences in terms of their graduate applications. I also want to kind of weigh in terms of my experience as a graduate student at Stanford University. Stanford has a graduate admissions committee that has students on it, on the committee, and I have been a member of the graduate admissions committee there as well, from a different perspective, from the perspective of a student, and before that, of course, as an international applicant. So it's kind of a range of experiences that I'll bring to bear on the discussion today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions and contributing to your understanding. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Ashwini. And next, joining the panel will be Dr. Ruth Kramer from Georgetown University.
All right, thank you, Mary. Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's having a good day so far. Thank you for joining us. As Mary said, my name is Ruth Kramer. I'm an associate professor at Georgetown University. And I, for the last 3 years or so, have administered graduate admissions in the theoretical linguistics concentration in the department here. So I gather all the files together, distribute them to faculty reviewers, collate reviews, and along with the faculty reviewers and the graduate school, help to make final admissions decisions. So I have a lot of useful information for you from that side of it, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ruth. And our fourth faculty panelist will be Dr. David Pesetsky.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, David, for organizing this and for inviting me to participate. So my name is David Pesetsky. I teach at MIT. I just finished 5 or 7, depending on how you count, years as the head of the department. In my department, we have a person who is in charge generally of organizing the admissions process, but we make our decisions as a committee of the whole. So I've been reading enormous numbers of admission files for well over 3 decades at this point, and have some ideas about how people who are interested in grad school or interested in applying to programs like ours can represent themselves and give us the information that's useful about what kind of a student you're going to be. So I'm looking very much forward to being part of the process today.
Thank you, David. And our final panelist is Dr. Chris Potts from Stanford University.
All right, thanks everyone. Yeah, I'm Chris Potts. I'm a professor at Stanford. Like my fellow panelists, I have lots of experience in various aspects of graduate school admissions. I sometimes feel like my winter is really overly full of evaluating applications for various things. Because of the nature of my appointment at Stanford, I've served on admissions committees, not just in linguistics, but also in computer science and in symbolic systems, which is Stanford's version of cognitive science. And I'm also co-director of a large internship program that we run in the cognitive sciences, where we get about 500 applications per year for that. And that's aimed at rising juniors in college who are thinking about graduate school in cognitive science. So I'm chair of our linguistics graduate admissions committee this year, but I'm also happy to talk about the differences between these various kinds of programs.
Great. Thank you all for being part of the panel. And at this point, we'll be kind of going through some frequently asked questions that we often receive, maybe via email. And I imagine a number of the attendees have these questions as well. So we'll start with that and then open it up to a general discussion with the attendees. So the first question that I have for the panel is, how should a student figure out, this is something Jamaal began to address already, how should a student figure out which graduate schools to apply to, how many to apply to? And this is kind of an elaborate question because there's a lot of different things people have to think about. Should they have specific faculty in mind as they're applying, or particular research projects? Should they be thinking about the languages they're interested in working on, the subfields of linguistics that they want to specialize in? Do you mention all of these things, some of these things? How do you manage all of this information? And kind of an additional question that is related to this, is it appropriate to reach out to faculty that a student is interested in working with, and how does one do that appropriately?
Do you want to call
So
us?
I'll let you, so you all can either signal that you would like to answer the question by waving your hand, or you can indicate it in the chat and I'll try to call on you. All right, Marlyse, please go ahead, and then Chris.
Thank you. This is a wonderful question, obviously multi-layered. And I would say that the first thing to think about is really, what is the topic that is driving your interest, leading you to apply to grad school in linguistics in the first place? So I think that you don't go to grad school for, or start a PhD, as Jamaal referred, I mean, it is indeed, I think that the word that you used, Jamaal, was a process. It's definitely challenging, stimulating, a very enriching experience. But for you to gear yourself up to go through 5 years of that experience, I think that it's very important to first identify for yourself what topic, what interest is driving you to apply to grad school in the first place. And based on the topic, I think it will help you identify the appropriate departments and faculty that could share that interest with you. So this is how I want to first set it up. And leave it up to my colleagues to chime in.
Marlyse, Chris?
I just had a small thing I wanted to add, which is my first instinct is to say apply widely, because if you're accepted to all of them, you could go to none of them, right? At that point, the ball will be in your court, and so you might as well just apply to all the places that look interesting to you. I know that it can be a financial burden to do that because the applications are often expensive, and so the only thing I wanted to add there is do some fact finding around places that have fee waivers. So for example, Stanford will waive the fee. You do need to, I think, apply for that. And I think that's pretty common. So that could at least reduce the financial burden. I know there's a strategic issue we could discuss here around whether or not there's a cost in applying and being rejected and applying again, and whether that should play into the kind of schools that you apply to and when you apply. But let's set that aside. I still want to just stand by my line that I think it's good to apply widely at that first stage.
Thanks. Ruth?
Another way to figure out which schools to apply to is to ask the faculty that you're working with. They will have probably lots of opinions, and I recommend asking many of them, all the ones that you know or have had good interactions with, what their opinions are about where to go for graduate school with respect to your particular topic that you're interested in. And they will give you a lot of insight into what they know. You know, they might have information that's not available on official websites about, you know, who's being hired, who has left, who's moving around. That could be very crucial for you to know. And they would probably be happy to help you and give you information about that.
So I think what Ruth just said is the most important thing that I wanted to say as well. You know, if you're an undergraduate, something or another got you interested in linguistics, you took a fantastic class, you took several fantastic classes, you had a research project that has you excited. So you have some general idea of at least among the areas of linguistics that you've been exposed to, you know, what sorts of things you could imagine yourself wanting to spend your life doing, or at least the next 4 or 5 years. Go to those professors, the people who encouraged you, the people who got you excited. You know, I would say, you know, don't talk to 10 people, but don't talk to just one either. Maybe go talk to 2 or 3 people and collect a list. And then we live in an era now where you can go on the web and get some sense of how these departments represent themselves. And don't be afraid to apply to any place that you think might be a good place to be. You know, there's a financial cost, but if you can, you know, bear the cost of maybe being turned down, you owe it to yourself to apply to a place that you think excites you and where you'd like to be. One thing I wanted to add is depending on the sub area of linguistics that you're aiming at, the importance of studying with a particular Professor X is going to vary. Right? So if you're interested in a sort of a lab type area of linguistics, that can function a lot like lab sciences, and it becomes very important whose lab you might be in, you know, which professor is doing which kind of work. In theoretical departments, it's very common to, for the department as a whole, to have the attitude that you're really the student of the whole department, that we're educating you, you'll discover new areas and so forth. And there it may be a little less important that, you know, your interests align with a particular professor or you want to go there because of somebody else. And it's more important to get a general feel for what the department is like, what kinds of students that they produce. So that's, you know, it's not immediately obvious that you need to have what I think they call these days a professor of interest. More important perhaps to have a department of interest.
Thanks. And I guess just the last piece of this question, is it okay to reach out to faculty that a student is interested in working with, and how should one go about doing that? Ashwini, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was actually going to add to what David was saying, that it makes a lot of sense as one is researching the departments that one is interested in to do research in enough depth to be able to write to faculty members that one is interested in working with, and ask them about ask them the question as to whether, you know, what they see as a good fit is in fact a good fit at the level of, you know, just applying. So not at the level of obtaining admission maybe, but is it a good fit from the perspective of the individual faculty member and the larger department. So I think it makes a lot of sense to apply perhaps in early fall or so before the admission to to kind of get that kind of response from the department.
Thanks. And Marlyse, did you have something to add?
I just wanted to directly address the second sub-question with respect to getting in touch with a faculty member. What I would strongly encourage students to do is to actually get in touch with a couple, at least, 2 or 3 faculty members, and to, if you do your homework, to let yourself be driven by that topic of interest that is leading you to apply to grad school in the first place. It does determine the subfield, and the people specializing in those subfields. And ideally, if you can reach out to several people in a given department pertaining to that subfield, I feel that you are better off. In our case, we have several faculty for each of the core components of the department. And I think it's always a good idea to get in touch with every member of that sub-area that you're interested in. We also have an advising format, which I think tends to work well for our students, in the sense that you end up having 2 advisors in addition to the other committee members that you choose along the path. And so that really allows you to bounce off, your ideas of several people. One last thing I wanted to mention is that when you send out that email to the faculty, the more precise you are about why you are interested in the department, why you are interested in their research topic, the better off you are. So it's all about really identifying that original topic that's going to lead you down, the linguistic path.
And David and Chris?
Yeah. So I just wanted to, from a slightly different direction, to reduce nervousness on the part of applicants here. I mean, it seems to me it's a good thing and an important thing to write to someone in a department if you have a real question, something you really want to know. But it's not an obligatory part of the process. Thinking about classes that we've admitted at my institution over the last few years, most of these people, and I can't swear they didn't write to anybody, but I don't hear from potential applicants all that often. And when I do, it's usually with some good reason. So you shouldn't feel like in order to apply to Department X, you have to pick 3 faculty members and write to them and come up with questions for them. Nobody, I've never been at an admissions meeting where somebody says, why should we admit this person? They didn't write to us. So it's really, you should write if you have reason to do it. If you have a good question, it's for your benefit, not for the benefit of your application.
Thanks. And Chris?
Yeah, just a small thing to add. Don't worry if you don't get a response. I wouldn't read anything into that. Not all these professors are very good about their email. Down the line, you could factor this into your decision making because, of course, responding to your email will eventually be important to you if they're advising you. But at this first stage, if you don't get a response, there's really no information there. And if you do get a response, then it might be the start of something that could lead to a collaboration. So whatever risks there are, I think they're worth taking.
Thanks. And yeah, Jamaal, I was just going to ask for your perspective.
Absolutely. I just also wanted to potentially avail graduate students in that decision-making process. Graduate students have an interesting perspective on the faculty. It's not to say that anyone's being disingenuous, but it is to say that the composition of any given department may shift over the course of time, right? And so graduate students need to be intimately aware of who's on sabbatical, who's available, the leadership styles and advising and mentorship tactics of individual professors. And they can answer and address those issues directly and quickly. And oftentimes are a bit more available for meeting, for coffee, if you wanted to just kind of see what the physical layout of the department might be. So use grad students as a resource as well. Typically their information is on the website.
Thanks. And Jamaal, did you reach out to faculty when you were applying to graduate programs?
I indeed did. Yes, I was made aware of the program that I chose to attend by a professor. It was not on my radar. I was taking Candy Goodwin's linguistic anthropology class, and she recommended Santa Barbara, and it was not on my radar. And at which point I was made aware of Santa Barbara. I looked into their a sneak peek program, a program that invited several prospective students to come and visit the campus for a couple of days on Santa Barbara's dime, which is always nice. And I was able to get a lot of my questions answered and really feel very comfortable and confident with it being on my short list. So yeah, and that was, of course, having spoken to many of the faculty and the grad students in particular.
Thank you all. So diving deeply into the kind of different elements of the application process now, the first, I think, issue that looms large for a lot of students is the GREs. Jamaal has already expressed his lack of enthusiasm for them. I think a lot of us share that feeling, but I know that a lot of departments also find a value in them. So the question here is, do students need to take them for your particular program? And how should they be preparing for that exam if necessary? How much importance is placed on the GRE? And in particular, is there any kind of threshold score that students need to attain?
I hope we can hear from all the panelists about this, just for their department policies. I don't need to kick it off, but I could. But there's a good sampling of departments here, and I know that attitudes toward the test are changing. I'll go first and just say that up until this year, we required the GRE, and now we're not accepting the GRE as a part of the application. Stanford last year opened this question up to all departments, and they presented us with lots of evidence that the test is not measuring what it claims to measure. We already kind of knew that, and I think it was a really small part of our decision making. And this was just a chance for us as a faculty to say, well, now we can completely ignore it, so that it's not going to bias our decision making at all now, because it's not even an option to submit them. And the other thing that we were worried about beyond our own biases is what it could do to the pool of applicants that we get. So it's expensive to take, and students might think that if their scores aren't at a certain point, then they shouldn't bother applying to Stanford, which could be cutting out lots of interesting people who would thrive in our department. So for all those reasons, we decided not to accept them at all. And they're not, my understanding of our policy is that they're not even an option, so that you don't have to do some game theoretic thing of worrying that we'll think that the absence of those scores is an indication that they weren't good. It's just not going to be part of our decision making. And I think a bunch of departments have gone in this direction recently, and I think this is all great.
Ashwini and then David.
Yeah, so the department, I mean, Ohio State in general hasn't gotten rid of the GREs, and there is a minimal requirement threshold score that the graduate school has, which is for the writing component, it's a score of 4, I believe, and for the verbal and quantitative combined, it comes to, it should be above the 75th percentile, but that is at the level of the graduate school. At the level of the department, we do not care as much about GRE scores, and we don't use GREs to weed out people at all. However, when we have some kind of a discrepancy between what we see as the quality of an application and a GRE score, such that the GRE scores aren't up to the graduate school requirements, we like to see evidence that can allow us to make a compelling argument to the graduate school as to why individuals should be admitted. So, so if we have writing samples or some information from the letter writer, information like that, that is going to allow us to kind of explain to the graduate school why some students should be admitted. But as a department, GREs have very low value in terms of making our decisions, and we rely much more on the statements, the letters, and the writing samples that the students present us with.
Thanks. And David?
Yeah, just very briefly, I mean, MIT, as far as I know, we've never required the GREs in linguistics. And unfortunately, perhaps students do have the power to send them to us, and we get them. So occasionally at an admissions meeting, somebody will take note of unusually good or unusually bad scores, but there's no sort of regularity to that. And I don't think we've ever had the impression that they're particularly predictive of graduate student success.
Marlyse, and then Ruth.
So I just wanted to say that the University of Michigan, so the Rackham Graduate School specifically, discouraged us from considering the GREs a few years ago. And then I chaired the admissions committee for about 5 years, and for the past 2 years, we have not even mentioned the GRE scores in our evaluation of each applicant, on the basis, and that was the key argument that the Grad School gave us, is that it is not predictive of students' achievements in the long run. So that's why they dropped it.
Yeah, Georgetown requires the GRE scores for all of the doctoral candidates for admission and most of the master's students as well, although it makes an exception for students who are currently undergraduates at Georgetown who are applying to accelerated master's programs. They don't have to take the GREs. But in general, I agree with everybody else. It's maybe the lowest factor in a file. We don't really look at them very systematically. It's only in cases where you see very extreme scores that they sometimes come up. They can help a file if it's very high and it's otherwise weaker, or maybe they'll raise a question or two for a strong file if they're very, very low. But normally we just kind of pass right by them. They have to be there, but they're not predictive of graduate success.
Thanks. And Jamaal, could you say something about your process? Because I know that we did require the GRE when you applied, and possibly other programs you applied to as well. So how did you prepare for the GRE?
Well, I took a Princeton Review, a GRE prep course, and I scheduled my, which is the thing you have to do, you have to schedule the exam. That's a big ordeal, and it gets kind of tight towards the October, November, because deadlines and due dates. I was fortunate as far as the costs because I was a part of an undergraduate research program called May's Undergraduate Research Fellows. And so they helped to defray some of the costs associated with the preparation and dissemination of the scores. Yeah, I felt like it was more or less just studying a test that showed how well you are at taking tests. But not very well, not predictive at all, I imagine. So says the literature. It was a frustrating process. I hated it. I can say anecdotally that I know a lot of people who did not apply to graduate school who wanted to go to graduate school because of the GRE directly. They just didn't want to go with them. They didn't want to hassle their lives. And again, it kind of was exacerbated by their imposter syndrome. So I have strong feelings, as you might imagine, about the GRE. So I'm very excited to hear that so many different departments share that critique. So I'm encouraged. So thank you all for that.
And I will add, UCSB is currently in dialogue. Our graduate division has encouraged people to consider eliminating the GRE requirement that was standard up until this year. Everything happens very slowly in the UC system. So we are kind of locked into accepting GREs in this review cycle, but I certainly hope as graduate director to eliminate that requirement in the coming review cycle. And we have not placed weight on them for a number of years now. And the graduate division, as of this past year, said that faculty on the central fellowship committees are not even allowed to consider GRE scores in evaluating nominees for university fellowships. So I think that this is a trend maybe at the national level and across disciplines at this point. I will say though, for those who do need to take the GRE for various schools, ETS does provide a fee waiver for candidates for whom it would be a financial burden. That process can take a while, so you should start early. And certainly for our program, we have always accepted unofficial self-reported GRE scores with the expectation that when you get the official report, you would submit that. So it should not delay you because we know that it can take a while. All right, thanks for everyone on that. The third question regards the statement of purpose. What should it look like? And is there more than one document like this in your own graduate admissions process? For example, the University of California requires both a statement of purpose and a personal statement. So it would be worth explaining what the difference is and how best to use each of those documents to explain to the committee who the candidate is. David?
Yeah, okay. So, so my department, I think it's I actually don't even remember whether it's called a personal statement or a statement of purpose, but there's only one such document that MIT requires, though we ask for something else, and I'll talk about it in a minute. I mean, the number one topic that I discuss and consider important to discuss with undergraduates who are looking to apply to graduate school is actually the statement of purpose, or personal statement, whatever it is, which is extremely important to us. And we read them carefully and take them very seriously, along with the letters of recommendation and the writing samples. Those are probably the most important things that we look at in the file. And the way I usually describe it, and I think programs may differ in what they're looking for, but I usually try to emphasize that what you should write is something like an intellectual autobiography. So, you know, it's about how you got interested in the field, why you're interested in the field, what you hope to learn, what questions interest you. Ideally followed by some for instance, right? So, you know, the classic good and valuable statement of purpose is, you know, linguistics fascinates me because of X, Y, and Z. I took a class in such, and that was really interesting because of so-and-so. I'm really interested in trying to answer the following questions. And, you know, in this class, I wrote this paper that I found exciting because it helped me make progress on one of these questions. In my senior thesis in progress, I'm trying to answer another one of these questions. Then you end your statement of purpose. Right? So there are extremes in other directions that sort of don't work. So it's one thing to understand is it's very different from the college admissions essay, at least the American college admissions essay. You know, so your feelings when your parakeet took ill as a child, that's not for graduate school. You know, the things that are very personal like that, at least for us, unless they somehow connect to the program, are sort of not relevant. But then the other extreme, that you have some very technical project that you want to undertake, particularly for European applicants where the PhD is a different kind of program, that also isn't helpful. You know, there's this, you know, little morpheme or this definition of something, and I want to spend 4 years doing that. That should be a for instance. That should be an illustration of the kinds of questions that interest you, because we hope that if you come to our program, you're going to learn things you never even thought you were interested in and suddenly get excited about them. And you're going to broaden, you may end up working at completely different things. You're not coming to an American graduate program to do a particular project, but the general kinds of projects that interest you should figure in the statement of purpose. So if you kind of think about the task as teaching the people at the other end what kind of a linguist you want to be, what kind of a student you're likely to be when you're in the program, you won't go wrong. And of course, exactly what that is going to differ from person to person. A lot more I could say, including the other thing we asked for, but I've talked for a long time. I should let other people comment. Chris, I can't hear you.
Sorry about that, I'm muted. I had a question for the panel, but Ruth, you raised your hand, so you could go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I agree with what David said, and I think that's why the statement of purpose is so difficult, because it's a personal narrative, but it has to be professional in tone. Okay, and that is a very tough document to write, one that you don't get a lot of preparation in writing, and so I think I totally agree with the steps that David laid out, where you talk about how you found linguistics, what really inspires you about it, give for instances about what you would like to do, and once you've drafted it, have lots of people read it. You know, have a trusted professor read it, have a fellow student who's also applying to grad school read it, have your mother read it. You know, just have everybody read it and give you comments. It's tough to write, so it takes a village to write a statement of purpose.
Chris, did you have a question for the panel?
The question I had, which always vexes me, but I get it a lot, is whether or not students should mention particular faculty members in these statements. And I always kind of give the answer that sounds right to me, which is do it only if it's genuine, if you actually have a connection and you can substantiate it. But I do worry sometimes that I'm like, that's not quite the right advice, that they could get a little bit of an edge if they invented some genuine connections or something like that. And so I don't know. So I stand by my first bit of advice, but I am curious to know what other people think when they give advice, what advice they give, and what they think when they encounter their own names in these statements and stuff like that.
That's exactly the advice I give, exactly that. Right? In fact, it wastes space, right? So you have limited space for these things. And increasingly, I think it must have been recommended on some website somewhere wrongly, a quarter of a page gets taken up with, when I come to your department, I want to work with, Chris Potts on this and David Pesetsky on that and Ruth Kramer on that, and, a quarter page of a laundry list. And every year, without fail, also somebody submits an application to MIT saying that when they come to MIT, they want to work with, and the laundry list is from UCLA or somewhere else, right? That doesn't disqualify the person, but you just don't want to go there. Exactly, I agree completely with what you just said.
Sorry. Raise my hand. Okay, I just want to say that we get a mixed bag among our applicants in terms of some people who are applying to the department because they have something quite precise in mind in terms of research topic or research program that helps them define the set of faculty that they can work with. This being said, of course, it makes their case a bit more compelling in the sense that we see the fit between the applicants and what we have to offer. So I think, that's the plus. What I want to add, however, is that it's very important to keep in mind that even if you go to grad school with a topic in mind, that as someone else on the panel said earlier, in the course of those first 2 years where you are exploring all kinds of subject matters, you are bound to discover things or areas that you didn't know about, that you're discovering for the first time, and your research agenda is going to take, a wide turn as a consequence. So nobody is looking into binding you or marrying you to the research statement that you write. I think that when you read the research statement as an admissions committee, we are looking for someone with an idea, a sense of why they are applying to grad school in linguistics and where, why they are going through this in the first place. So I wanted to say that because I also wanted to highlight that, yes, some students apply, not mentioning anything about the faculty. It doesn't have to be there, definitely not. But still, I feel that to have a sense of where you are heading, generally or broadly speaking, does help your application.
Thanks. And Jamaal, very quickly, I'm getting the 5-minute warning flashing lights from David, but I want to try to squeeze in one more question, but if you just have a quick comment here.
Yes, very quick. It seems like I think that question is pointing to the idea of how do you demonstrate that you are a good fit or that you research the program in and of itself, right? And I think that you can do that by referencing specific professors and by not doing it. Sometimes it takes a bit more creativity if you don't want to invoke names. Again, also warning, sometimes websites are out of date. So always check before you invoke a name. But I'll also say, just from a California perspective or a UC model, we do have a personal statement and a statement of purpose. The personal statement is an opportunity for students to say the things that aren't otherwise found on their application, right? So the idea of their lived experience, their human history, their personhood that they bring with them as a scholar, which is also very useful as you engage in graduate work. So again, very tricky. These documents are not easy to craft and write because of the limited space and the amount of information you want to convey, which is why you want to give yourself as much time as possible and avail yourself to as many eyes as possible to get the best feedback to make sure that you convey what you mean to convey.
Thank you. And just for our last question, so we've hit most of the highlights of what's involved in an application. We haven't really talked about transcripts. Maybe that will come up in the Q&A, but the other large piece of an application is, of course, the writing sample. And the question here is, how does an applicant select an appropriate writing sample? Does it have to be in linguistics? Could it be in another field? And what should it look like? So we just have a couple of minutes for this, but if people have contributions on that, we'll happily hear them. Chris?
Just quickly, the writing sample is a very important part of the application for us, and it gets more and more important as we get through the various rounds. So we're looking at smaller and smaller pools, so that by the end, we might be doing a lot of our decision making based on the content of the writing sample. And I would just say at that stage, the most important thing is that it provides some evidence that the student would do well in our program. So evidence of like an ability to do research, to think creatively on your own, those things are really important at that final stage.
And Ashwini, did you want to say something?
I completely agree with Chris as to the centrality of the writing sample in determining, especially in the final cut, as to which of the graduate school applicants can be considered to be mature in terms of the kind of research that they would be doing over the course of their graduate career and beyond. One of the things that we often encounter is writing samples that come from a field that is different from linguistics, and in particular literature samples that are coming from more humanities oriented disciplines. And one thing that I do want to say is that while the polish and the depth in these samples is important to understand how a particular student approaches their research, it is somewhat difficult to use this kind of data to determine how the student might work within the environment of a linguistics graduate program. So it's kind of important to think about the kind of writing sample that you're sending. And although the content is going to be looked at with a lot of attention, sometimes it is difficult to evaluate how it would apply to research in linguistics.
Thanks, and David, and then Marlyse. Oh, sorry. Either way.
Marlyse.
Thank you, David. So very quickly, I just wanted to say that it's important to keep in mind that ideally you should submit a writing sample that a lecturer or a recommender can also comment on. So based on the class that you took, and the recommender happens to be one of the teachers for whom you wrote that writing sample, and this way we get the two perspectives on that particular piece. But just to back up what Ashwini said, it doesn't have to be necessarily something in linguistics. But what we want to see is, your writing style, the argumentation, the type of argumentation, the logic, the creativity. So we look at other aspects that may not have to do with linguistics per se.
That's true.
And David.
Yeah. So, and for us, at least within linguistics, what we look for is obviously sort of signs that you've developed some appropriate competence in the field from classes that you've taken. But what we're looking for as well is a spark, some evidence that you have come up with a cool idea or a fresh approach to something, or interesting evidence, or discern something in a set of data from a field methods class that wasn't obvious. And with that in mind, I mean, we know that, I think it's important to also say this, we know that the people applying are, in an undergraduate program or in the midst of an MA program. They're not people who are writing their PhDs with us right now. And we don't expect it to be perfection, publishable, or finished, right? If you're submitting the beginnings of a senior undergraduate thesis in, mid-December or something, if it's chapters 2 and 3 and you have some idea what chapter 4 will look like, or chapter 3 breaks off in the middle because you have to go back and get some more fieldwork or something, this is perfectly fine. Right? What we want to know from these things is not whether we're going to publish you in language next month, but what kinds of papers we might be seeing from you in our own classes when you come, and what sorts of work you might be doing for us. So don't be afraid to send us even, we get clever problem set solutions. Anything that sort of represents what you're like as a linguist in a good way that you think might be interesting. Don't be fearful and don't seek for perfection, because that's not what we're looking for.
Thank you all. And I think at this point, we're going to be switching over to the general Q&A, and people are welcome, of course, to pick up on things that have already been said, as well as to open up other areas. I'm guessing things like funding might be of interest, for example. That's one of the questions we didn't get to, but I'm guessing that might come up. So just to remind the participants that you should use the questions widget on your dashboard, and David Robinson will be fielding these questions, or he'll be moderating them for us, I guess.
Yes, I will. And if your question is for a particular panelist, please specify that. I'm going to start with the first question. It's a good general question. What is the most important thing among the materials during the application procedure? Statement, writing sample, or something else?
Okay. Ashwini, it looked like you had something to say there.
No, that was accidental. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
So they're all three equally important. Personally, when I'm reading a file, I read the statement of purpose first, then I read the letters, and then I go on to the writing sample. That's because statement of purpose tells me why you're applying and who you are and what you're interested in. The recommendation letters, sort of fill that in various ways, and then I have a perspective for going to the writing sample.
I have the same response. That's the sacred trilogy for me. So those three documents, and I cover them in the exact same sequence that David mentioned. So always the statement first, and then letters, and then the writing sample.
Any other comments on that one? All right, David, what's our next question?
All right, next question. I am now a first-year MA student planning to apply for a PhD program in theoretical linguistics next year. How can I prepare in the meantime?
I could just say, because just following on the answers that we just got, try to cultivate connections with professors who will write you letters, do things with them that go beyond the classwork so that they get to know you and have substantive things to say in the letter. And the more you can do, the better there. And then, because the writing sample really is important, work this year on cultivating a really good writing sample, one that, as all the panelists said, I think in various ways, that is evidence that you can do the kind of theoretical linguistics that you want to do in grad school.
Yeah, and also try to go to any linguistics related events that are happening. Go to conferences or workshops if you can. Finances are always an issue here. If there's anything going on locally, try to go and network and see talks and professionalize yourself. Attend the Summer Institute if it is happening this year, to meet people, make connections, and really make a nice network for yourself as you start thinking about the next stage.
Any other comments on that question? All right, David?
Okay, next
sorry,
question.
Ashwini, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it's also a good time as you're working on your writing sample and so on to look at who else is interested in the kind of questions that you're interested in, and this might be a good time to reach out to people with the genuine questions that you have in departments that you think you're likely to apply in. So that would be another way to spend your time.
Thanks. All right, David.
Okay, good. The next question actually follows up on what Ashwini just said. Could we get an example of what one should say in an email when reaching out to faculty that one is interested in working with?
Great question. I'm going to weigh in here because I've gotten a couple of emails over the past few months, some of which I was delighted to receive and some of which I didn't even know how to respond, because they would be things like, hi, I'm interested in sociocultural linguistics. Can I come to your program? I don't have enough information to even know how to engage with that. So I think picking up on the recommendation earlier that people be specific about their interests and have an actual question beyond, do you think you'll admit me? Because we can't know until we see your materials whether you're going to be a competitive applicant or not. But you could certainly, I have had people say things like, are you taking students? That's not really the model we work within. People are admitted to the program, not to work with a specific faculty member. So that isn't really an apt question, but at least it gets the conversation started. But the kinds of things that I find delightful and welcome are, this is the kind of research I've been doing. I'm really excited about your program because of X, Y, and Z. What I really appreciate as a busy faculty member is when people say, just wanted you to know that I'm out here and that I will be applying, and no need to reply. And if they do have a question, that's great, and I'm happy to answer, but I'm also very happy just to be able to say, great, I'll look for your application, and that's the end of that interaction until we go through the review process.
Yeah.
So
Marlyse and then David? Oh, or the other way.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So, yeah, I mean, if you really do have a question, really something to talk about, I mean, I could live to regret this if suddenly it happens 60 times a week, but it can be better to say, you know, I'm working on this thing that you're working on, I read your paper, and I'm thinking of applying, I have some questions. Could we talk perhaps in person or by Skype at some point? I mean, as I said, if suddenly that becomes the fashion, I don't know where we'll find the time, but that's often easier than, you know, sometimes I get a cold call email out of the blue that's, you know, 8 screens long with technical questions about a paper, and I'm flattered that somebody read the paper that carefully, but I don't have the time or the wherewithal to read that, to think about it, or to make written comments. And so talking in person can sometimes be a much better thing to do, and every year a couple of people make appointments like that. You shouldn't be afraid to do that. If the person at the other end doesn't have the time, they'll let you know that. Sorry, please.
Yes, I mean, I just wanted to really drive the point across that Mary made in terms of really showing or justifying why you are reaching out to that particular faculty on the basis that something that you have already elaborated on either in a paper or, you know, doing field work on a language that is of interest to the faculty. I think that just to show the commonality or the common ground between what you're doing and what the faculty or a set of faculty, because I really encourage to reach out to several people if you wish to go that way. It's not necessary. I think that just to demonstrate the commonalities in terms of research interests, that's where you start. That should be, you know, in the very first paragraph when you drop that email.
Any other thoughts on this one? I will say short and sweet is better than long and detailed as a first foray into this conversation, because if they show interest, you can give more information, but be informative enough that we have something to go on. All right, David, next question, please.
All right, next question. Any advice on applying for fellowships, especially for international students?
Please.
So we do get applicants from abroad, so you don't have to apply for fellowships. Actually, if you make it to our shortlist, we fly you over here. We had an applicant from France, for example, last year. So you don't have to be preoccupied with getting fellowships if you apply from abroad. If you are desirable as a candidate, if you're a good fit for that particular department, for those of us who have interviews, we do fly in our long list of interviewees. Then, you know, we take care of bringing you aboard. And then, if you get accepted, we have a 5-year funding package with different conditions associated with them that we give our top candidates.
I think that is also how it works at OSU. We'll admit students and commit to a 5-year funding package, which will be a combination of fellowships from the university or the College of Arts and Sciences, or the department will find a way of making sure that students are fully funded through a combination of teaching and research assistantship. So it's not an individual application for fellowships that is expected from the students. Once you're admitted, the department is committed to a 5-year package for the admitted student.
I mean, I heard the question a little bit differently. I just wanted to add, in case this was the intent of the question, it's extremely useful to the receiving department if you have access to fellowships, say from your home country or Fulbright, to apply for them. If you're a Canadian, to apply for a SHIRK. If you're a US citizen, to enter the somewhat difficult NSF graduate fellowship process. because that makes it possible for the department to admit more students, and it helps the financial health and happiness of the department at the other end. So I think it sounds like we're all from departments that have a 5-year funding package of one sort or another for our students. But we are, delighted that you're helping the field and your fellow students if you can proactively think about other opportunities for funding that you can bring with you when you come. So it's really very, very good and useful thing to look into that. The details will differ depending on your nationality.
Any other comments on that question? All right, David.
Okay, here's a good one. How helpful or necessary is it to have formal coursework in the field of linguistics before applying for graduate study? For someone with a humanities background, is formal coursework in social sciences recommended before applying?
Chris.
I have a few comments about that. So if you're at an institution that offers a lot of those courses, then having them on your transcript is very important for us. Like, I think we've moved past largely the days when linguistics was free form and small enough that it could accept lots of people who had done no linguistics before graduate school. It's just gotten too competitive. But a major qualification to that we try to be really thoughtful about as a committee is if you come from a school that just doesn't offer linguistics, then things you've done on the side in a mentorship situation, or you attended an LSA institute, all those things would substitute and show, in fact, in that case, it might show that you've done above and beyond what your institute offered in terms of making connections with linguistics, and so you could shine. So that's a really important qualification, that if those courses aren't offered, it's not necessarily a mark against you, especially if in the statement you can show that you've done everything that you could to get the background that you need for graduate school.
Other comments on that, David?
I mean, one thing that there's a shortage of in the United States, but which is relevant here, are MA programs, in linguistics. But I've often given the advice to a person who's gotten bitten by the linguistics bug, but too late, or at a school that has very little linguistics, to think about applying to, for example, there are very good MA programs in Canadian universities. There are a number in Europe, which is a way of doing real linguistics for a few years, and then applying to PhD programs. And I would just extend that recommendation to anybody listening who's in that situation.
Thanks, Ruth.
In regards to David's last point, we sometimes take PhD applicants who are promising but who haven't done a lot of linguistics coursework and recommend that they apply to our master's program. And we can just kind of move the application over. They don't actually have to formally apply all over again. It's the same requirements. So we just ask them, usually reaching out directly, say, would you like to be considered for the master's? And often that works out very well. The majority of them agree to that. And then they end up applying to doctoral programs eventually once they complete our master's.
And I will just, as a booster, I guess, for the state of California, say that the California State University system, a number of those campuses offer excellent MA programs in different aspects of linguistics, so different specializations depending on the campus, and a little bit more affordable, especially if you're in state. All right, David.
And you mean David me, right?
David Robinson, sorry, I should probably say that each time.
Great. So we've had a few questions on this topic. Can you speak to how breaks in education are considered? I went BA, MA, the dual degree route, and now I'm planning to take a break after my MA of at least a year or so. I know that others take time off after undergrad as well. How much does this factor in what you do?
I think it's wonderful. Do it. That's not a problem.
You might, Jamaal, you have direct experience with this. I really don't. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I'll just be quick, because my route was non-traditional as well. My break was in a very nuanced and interesting time between transferring, but I still did go straight from the BA to the PhD, but break on the front end. I can say that breaks are great. and you should take them if you need them, because PhD programs are rigorous and exhausting and emotionally draining and mentally stressful. Many adjectives, and also very good and fulfilling. But you want to make sure that that is indeed what you want to do. I like to caution people who are interested in PhD programs to really consider that it's not a B-side thing, right? Like, you're not saying, I'm going to try this first, and if it doesn't work out, I guess I'll just do a PhD. That's not really how this works. You really need to be invested in it because it's really hard in a very different way than you're thinking, I'm sure. So make sure that it's what you want to do. Make sure that you're driven, you have a clear goal, and that attaining a PhD in this field will help you to accomplish that very clear goal. If it's just, I'm not sure, so I guess grad school, it's not going to be great for anybody involved. So yeah, but as it relates to breaks, especially as you're in undergrad, what happens is there's some community work that can happen, right? I talked a bit about applying with a cohort of students, and with that shared accountability, you can get stuff done in a more efficient way. And having access to a university with writing coaches and professors and all that really helps to get the ball rolling and get the application submitted. The tricky part about that is that you're also taking coursework and maybe writing a senior thesis and doing stuff. So time is really hard to manage there. So you have to weigh that cost benefit. Many times, if you know that you're a disciplined person and you can be self-driven, taking a year off to take naps, but then also submit very good applications is always a great option. But evaluate who it is that you are, what motivates you, what might be failings. And I think that if you can have clear answers to those questions about how you're driven, that'll inform how breaks might function for you.
Marlyse, and then Ruth, and then Chris.
So I just wanted to emphasize that students who are applying to a PhD program with a BA instead of master's should not be deterred from applying, or should not feel that they have to go through a master's program necessarily. Among our candidates or the final applicants that we admit, we do have a mix of BA and MA, and we take into account their background as we evaluate their application, because we don't hold it against, for example, a BA applicant to have less of training in linguistics than an MA applicant in linguistics. So I just want to make sure that you don't feel that you're less qualified to apply to a PhD program if you have the drive and if you have, the certainty that this is exactly what you want to do.
About taking a break, especially between BA and then doing an MA or PhD, one thing that students have told me they worry about is letter writers. So they're worried that they'll lose the connection with the professors, that they have cultivated and so forth, to which I say, don't worry too much. Take the time now to get to know the professors, for sure. That's extremely important, no matter whether you're taking a break or not. And then when you want to come back, when you've taken your break and you've decided, okay, I'm going to apply this year, get back in touch. And a very practical tip, send the professors all the materials you can think of to remind them of who you are, your resume or CV, what you might have, a little unofficial transcript if you have it, and say exactly when and where you knew them. And they will likely say, oh, yes, I remember you, and I would be happy to do this for you. It is very possible to take a break and then use letter writers if you cultivate those relationships now, and then remind them copiously of who you are when you get back in touch.
Thanks. And Chris?
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to say. Just maintaining these relationships. And I would even encourage you to keep people posted about what you're doing during the time that you're off. And I would just say that those are some of my favorite messages to get. It's interesting to hear about what students are off doing out in the world. And then when they do make the request for the letter, I don't have to try to remember who they are. In fact, I might already have some interesting material for the letter that I plan to write.
Thanks. And I'll just throw in here that A number of our applicants do take some time off before entering our graduate program, and we really welcome that because they come in with focus and with life experience that they can apply to the research that they want to do. Sometimes not taking a break can mean you're very unfocused and you're not really ready to put in those hard years of work that Jamaal described. And we want you to come in knowing what you want to do and then being able to do it joyfully and diligently, and rather than taking that break in the middle because you've hit a wall or you just don't really know where you want to go with your project. All right, David Robinson.
Okay, we've had several questions about writing samples, and they've been from people, say, who have been out of academia for many years and don't have a current writing sample, or whose background was in foreign language or in an unrelated area. So can you speak to that? What sort of writing samples do you look for in an application?
Apparently this is a hard question.
I mean,
David?
I mean, optimize for the situation. I mean, obviously a current writing sample, is in some sense a more obvious thing to send than an old writing sample. But if what you have is an older writing sample and it's good and it's interesting, you're the same person and you send that. But I think what we heard earlier holds in this case as well. Similarly, if you're interested in entering linguistics and you have some foreign language material that's maybe not dead on focused on the program in linguistics that you're applying to, but it represents you well and it's interesting and it's good. There may be questions that the department will have about how to evaluate that. But if that's the best that you have that represents you, you send that. And you send that, proudly. Right? So, if you have the opportunity to write something new or to attend a summer course and sort of refresh things for yourself, that's good too. But again, I wouldn't worry about always sending the thing that you think represents yourself the best. Maybe there are other answers people like to give.
Something else that I might add here is it is perfectly fine, at least in our program, the online portal does allow you to submit 2 writing samples. So if they show different aspects of your abilities and background, we're perfectly happy to have 2 different samples to represent you well. And I have had some applicants approach me and say, is it okay to just write something on my own? Yes, wow, that's amazing. That's one of those above and beyond moments like Chris described. So yeah, that would really be impressive if you feel like nothing that you've done for your previous education represents who you are now. And that would give us a much better sense of who you have become and who you plan to be in graduate school.
So, can I add something to that? I mean, and this connects to the question before about, what people do with the time that they take off or as a break between their BAs and MAs. And we have had graduate students who've, gone abroad to teach English and spent that time doing documentation of some language or dialect or some sociolinguistic project. And so that's the kind of work that's done with less direction, right, in terms of, there's little advising. But then the kind of content that comes out of that is sometimes also presented as a writing sample that's not a master's thesis or a term paper or anything like that. But we would take something like that very seriously as well. So.
And thank you, Mary. If I may add to this, in our case, we adopt a very holistic approach to the evaluation of each of the applications. And that means that even if you've been away for a while, we're going to be looking through the personal statement, because we have the research statement and you also have the personal statement that allows us to see who you are, what kind of experiences have shaped you. And if that, in combination with your past academic experience, convinces us that you have what it takes to be admitted, we can use that holistic approach to see, to understand why you have not, why you, been inactive in linguistics for a while.
And David Robinson got another question for us.
So we've had a couple of questions on how do you evaluate English proficiency, and do you require a TOEFL? How does that play into the application process for non-native speakers of English?
I can just say that Stanford's policy is that they are required for students who aren't already in a U.S. institution or who are not U.S. citizens or something like that, or there's some criteria for who has to take it. And then there is a minimal score that Stanford imposes at the level of the institution. And if we want an exception to it, we have to write a little memo, which in practice means that if we want the exception, we get it. We just have to write the memo. But we do look at them, and I guess they are an indication of what it would be like in the first year for those students to be in our classes and do the other things that we require of them.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to say that for our department, the TOEFL score for the international students are extremely important. We really want to make sure that when they come on board, there is no language barrier that's going to come in their way, given that the content, is challenging enough. So the grad school sets a specific score for the TOEFL score, and ours is even more demanding, because we really want to make sure that there is no language barrier for the applicant.
I will say at UCSB, we require the TOEFL if students don't have other ways of demonstrating their proficiency in English. And again, we do have that waiver option, as some other schools do. Students who come in a little under the score or who need a little more help, we do have an English for Multilingual Students program aimed just at graduate students. And so that helps them get up to speed, and they get help both with academic writing in English and with oral skills, especially professional presentations, and becoming a teaching assistant, so that wouldn't impact their funding in any way.
We have something very similar, Mary, in our case, similar English program to help them with improving their proficiency, if need be.
Yeah, I think those are fairly widespread. All right, David, I don't know, we're right at time, I think, so I'll leave it in your hands at this point.
Yeah, so it's about 2:30. If we do have quite a few more questions. If the panelists are all agreeable, I thought we might stay on for another 10 minutes, perhaps.
Okay.
Everybody able to do that, do you think?
Sure, somebody may knock on my door, in which case I'll go away and come back. Yeah.
Okay, let's take a couple more questions then. We've had a number of questions about the relative merits of applying directly from an undergraduate program or applying from a master's program to a PhD program.
So I could just say that I think our hope is that we would do some informal corrections for this and acknowledge that somebody who's in an MA program would have more research under their belt, more experience, and the application would therefore look fuller, and do some adjustments, because of course we want to be able to recruit people right from undergrad. So that's the hope, is that we would kind of adjust. We don't want to fully adjust, because being in a master's program is a great signal about people succeeding. And then I would guess that if you looked at our numbers, increasingly our classes are filled with people who have an MA. As just a fact about how what's happening in the final stages of our selection process.
I agree with Chris. I've definitely seen a swing in the graduate student population, that we are admitting more and more students who already have masters. But that's not to say that you have to have a master's at all. You can definitely go straight through or take a little break between BA and PhD, especially if you're coming out of a program where you had a linguistics major, and you don't need to do an MA per se to apply for a PhD program. There's that trend towards the master's, but it's not by any means a necessary first step.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think we've seen that trend from US students. Maybe I'm missing something, but I think most of our American students are coming out of undergraduate programs. For international students, including Canadian students, it's a bit different. So it seems like if you're, good linguistics undergrad at the University of Toronto, well, of course, you're going to take our MA, and then you apply to PhD programs. And a lot of the students we get, maybe most of the students we get from Europe are coming with an MA from somewhere or another. But our US students, I think it's just extremely common and extremely possible to come right out of an undergraduate degree.
So definitely possible, and I would guess that this is varying a bit by subfield. So like we're recruiting very heavily right now in NLP and psycholinguistics, and I think those candidates tend to already have the master's as compared to, so we also recruit lots of sociolinguists, and I think they're less likely to already have the master's. So like we could think by subfield. And certainly I want to be clear, like we are trying to recruit people right out of undergrad. It's not our intention to have the master's as a filter. But I am just observing the process and noticing this trend for us.
Marlyse?
And I just wanted to emphasize or reiterate something that I said earlier, that that should not be a deterrent for BA students to apply to grad school. So even with the awareness that I think seems to be confirmed across the board, including our department, that a lot of students are applying with MMA, promising undergraduate students should definitely apply, and it's not a predictor of long-term success, to have an MA. So a lot of students here have an undergraduate degree when they apply, and they are highly successful. So just go with what you got.
Jamaal, I was going to put you on the spot here and ask if you considered applying to MA programs in addition to going straight into a PhD program.
Thank you for that. I did not. And the reason why I didn't was the entire process was very new to me, right? So I just became aware of MA programs and then PhD programs, and I was becoming aware of terminal master's programs. But my goal was to try to develop a profile such that I would be competitive for whatever it is that I applied for. And so I shot for the moon. And it worked out in my case. And it could have worked out, it could have turned out a number of different ways. But I will say that as a person who did go directly from the BA to the PhD, it is possible. But I could also say that I did an undergraduate research program. I did have a major in linguistics. So there's a lot of those other like logistical things that I imagine helped the process if you happen to find yourself in a program or at an undergraduate university that does not offer linguistics. Maybe a bit trickier. If you're not writing an undergraduate thesis, i.e. have limited to no research experience, that might be trickier. It might be the case, even for your own peace of mind, to try to develop some research competency just to make sure that graduate school is a good fit for you, that is something that you would enjoy doing. So I would encourage, as again, we've all been hedging, I would encourage everyone to not think of a master's degree as a step down at all. It is, at the very least, you can utilize it as an exploratory venture to say, is this something that I'm actually interested in, such that I'll give 5 years and potential seniority salary increases in industry up to invest in myself in this way? Is it necessary? I guess is a way of thinking about it.
Ruth?
Another factor here is that master's programs tend not to provide funding. PhD programs do usually provide funding. You don't really want to accept a PhD offer if you don't have a guarantee of funding. So that's something to consider as well. It's a point in favor of going straight from BA to PhD if you can, because that way you don't have to commit to the paying master's tuition. At least in most places that do offer masters in the US, they don't offer either any funding or reliable funding. So.
David Robinson, any other questions?
Perhaps just one final question, and thanks for staying a bit late. How important are transcripts and grades?
It's for me, it sort of recalls a question that we had earlier, and so we look carefully at what people have taken relative to what was available at the institution, and use that as a chance to gauge how invested they are in the field and what kinds of experiences they've already had. But the actual grades themselves, I think this would be like what people use the GREs for. Very high, that's good. very low is going to be a concern, especially the way grades tend to work these days at US institutions where it's like only very high or very low. And I would say that if you have some really bad grades on your transcript, use the personal statement as a chance to do your best to provide some context. And I really do think that people in linguistics are receptive to arguments that there was one bad year with really mitigating circumstances that caused those low grades. But don't stay silent about that, because otherwise people will read a lot into low grades.
Any other comments on that?
I had my thought, but I just wanted to say what Chris just said. So just make sure that you address the bad grades, if any, by explaining in the personal statement what kind of personal circumstances led to obtaining those bad grades in the first place. So just address them.
You can also ask your letter writers to explain the situation more. If they are privy to the circumstances, they might or might not be, but if they are and they can say a little bit about what happened in a particular course and explain and give context, that also helps. And I know many specific instances of students that we have accepted in that exact same situation where they or their recommenders kind of explained what happened and we understood, and the students turned out to be amazing. So it can work out.
No, just add to that, you should be proactive about that, because as a letter writer, when I know that a student had a situation, I may be very unsure whether that's something I should be sharing with other people. So you should say, please share this, so that I know I can do it.
And also, in addition, can I say what I want to say?
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah. So in addition to the grades that you have received or the courses that you have taken, we also use the transcripts to look at kind of the breadth of material that you have under your belt, in addition to the depth in linguistics that one would expect relative to the access that you have had to courses. But what kind of courses have you been taking, and how willing are you to go beyond certain fields and so on. So the transcript kind of provides a sense of your curiosity and your intellectual adventures at some level as well, in addition to the grades that characterize it.
Thanks. And Jamaal?
Yeah, and I'll just say more. I think a theme that's been developed throughout the course of this webinar is the holistic or comprehensive nature of the application. And so considering each of these potential variables as telling a story about who you are and who you will be in the program is essential. The transcript is one part of that story. And if you feel like there might be an area of improvement or opportunity to explain, strategize about how you're going to get that story through. So that may be, as previously mentioned, tapping some of the letter writers and saying, hey, if it is the case that you can mention this idea or develop this idea about my overall narrative, that may be something that the letter writer may be willing to do. But I think all of this it favors a person who is engaged in more preparation, right? So if you give yourself more time, you can make these different strategic decisions about how to best present yourself as a scholar. If at any point you rush your application, these variables fall off. You can't now, try to suggest things to your letter writers if you're calling them with a week to go, saying, hey, would you mind? It's not helpful for anybody. So my encouragement is, all of you on the webinar now are leaps and bounds ahead of the game. You're learning information about the process from people who might be reading those applications, so you know more than you might have otherwise. Take that into consideration. You still have time and start to plan for success. Yeah.
Wow, I think that's a perfect note to end this discussion on. So David Robinson, you want to wrap things up for us?
Sure. Thank you again, everyone, for taking the time out of your day to attend this webinar. And many thanks to Dr. Bucholtz and to all of our panelists for taking the time out of their schedules to let us know more about their experiences on both sides of the graduate school admissions process. We had a lot more questions. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of them, but we will have a recording of the webinar available soon on the LSA's YouTube channel, and I will be in touch to let you know when it's ready. So thanks again, and goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.